I'm Becky and welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make scones from the unofficial Downton Abbey Cook's Cookbook. The scones are for a tea coming up soon. If these are sweet cream scones, and if the recipe tends to be a little too complicated for you, it's your first time, maybe you're a code baker, I'm also going to include a recipe for magic scones at the end. They're a bit simpler to make and an easier to follow recipe. Our oven is ready. Perfect time to start in on our scones. The first thing we're going to do is mix sour cream and baking soda. Baking soda, as we know, will grow fizzy when we add it to vinegar or any other acid. So the sour cream here, it's 1 cup of sour cream, is our acid for our baking soda. Just put that in there. Add our baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and I'm also going to add my vanilla at this point. Lovely, dark, rich, flavorful vanilla that my good friend Lori brought me from St. Martin. So we'll mix this all together and then it's going to sit and grow while we mix up the dry ingredients. Now the reason we want this to grow ahead of time, the reason we add that baking soda and acid mix is to help to make our scones grow bigger and fluffier. And as you can see, it is already starting to fizz up and work. So we'll set that aside and start in on our dry ingredients. I have 4 cups of sifted flour. I'm going to add 1.5 cups of sugar. I did say that they were sweet scones, so we're adding our sugar. This is for a sweet tea. It's not a savory. If you want to make savory scones, you can. You can add any other flavors to these. They will also be plain scones. You can add cheese if you want, a sharp cheese to make a savory scone. Just leave out most of the sugar. You can add fruit. You can have raspberries, white chocolate. You can have blueberries. You can have cinnamon raisin. You can add any of these flavors. White powders, make sure you label them in your kitchen. It's hard to tell them apart. I have 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar and I have 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Both of these white powders are also going to help us to grow our scones. I need a new spoon, so we'll grab this one. We'll mix the powders just a little bit. Nobody wants a mouthful of baking powder when they bite into something. So we're just mixing it gently into the flour fairly evenly. You could, if you need to sift your flour, sift your rest of your powders, your sugar, your baking powder, and your cream of tartar right through the same sifter to be evenly mixed. I also need to add some salt. Now my recipe does call for a teaspoon of salt, but it also calls for unsalted butter. I am using salted butter, so I don't want to add too much extra salt. They are sweet scones, not salty scones. So I'm just going to add a little bit of salt, not the whole teaspoon, so that we have a bit helping the flavor, but we're not making it overpowering. Once again, mix that in. Our next step is our butter. So my butter is a bit of a mess, believe it or not. This is what happens when you cut it into chunks when it's already room temperature. And you do want room temperature butter. We are going to mix this in until it looks like a course meal. If you have difficulty with this step, get your hands in there, or an alternate is to grate your butter while it is frozen. That will allow you to get the course meal shapes, and the butter will then thaw out as it bakes in the oven, which also helps to make it light and fluffy. If you have a pastry cutter, this is a good time to use it. If not, you can use 2 knives. They work really well to cut it in. Or you can just use your fingers and create a crumble. My hands are clean. I'm going to get my fingers in there right away. And we'll make it into a course meal. When I cut out my scones, I'm going to use what I like to call a biscuit cutter. Biscuit cutter would be an American term. American biscuit is very similar to a British or UK scone, because in England, if you have biscuits, it's actually cookies. So my biscuit cutter is going to cut it out, and the reason I'm using a biscuit cutter is because it has sharp edges, which will make a nice clean sharp edge to allow our scones to grow. If you can use a glass, you can use anything else like that. However, it's going to pinch the edges and it'll be less likely to become nice and fluffy. So here we go. My oven has been preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a very normal temperature. It's the regular temperature that we bake most things at. And it is waiting for us, ready to go. And you can see my flour is starting to look a bit like a course meal. Crumbly, almost like a shortbread. This is how you would make a shortbread as well, working the butter in. Just finish up with that. And then we're going to add our wet ingredients. If you remember, our wet ingredients is the mixture of the sour cream, baking soda, and vanilla. I also have an egg already slightly beaten, ready to go in as a dry ingredient as well. So just clean my fingers off a bit. And here you go. If you look in there, you'll see that the dough, the flour, and the butter is starting to mix together, creating shapes. That's the fun part. See what you can make. I'm going to make a well in the middle to add my wet ingredients. So first we'll put in the egg. And now it is time for that sour cream. You can see it is very fluffy, very airy, of course, to help with the growth of our scones. So just put that in the middle. Nice and messy and mucky. Perhaps I'll stir a little bit with the spoon before I stick my fingers back in there. Be prepared for a bit of an overflow here. I do have my baking sheet ready. I have put parchment on it, but if you don't have parchment, if you prefer not to use it, you're more than welcome to just grease your pan. You just want to make sure that your scones do not stick to your pan. Also, under my bowl here, I have a baking sheet, because once I have this mixed in, I'm going to turn it out onto that baking sheet to knead it a couple of times before I shape it. There are a few shapes you can do. One, of course, are circles. Most people think of circles when they think of scones. They don't think of circles. My biscuit cutter, they're thinking of triangles. And I'll show you how to make the triangles as well. Assuming I don't end up with flour at my nose. I can smell the sour cream in this, and the vanilla. It's going to be delicious. Now I'm using a mixture of white and brown flour, white and whole wheat. You're welcome to use either one or the other. If you want, you can try this with a gluten-free flour. This recipe happens to have a lot of milk products in it. If you cannot have milk, there are many recipes out there that make scones without any dairy at all. I'm almost ready to dump this onto my sheet here. As you can see, it's quite sticky. Making lots of more shapes. Just a bit of flour on my sheet. Scrape all this out. Still pretty crumbly because I was only mixing until it was starting to hold together. We don't want to overmix it. We want that butter to be able to grow. We don't want it blended in too much. At this point, I'm going to separate it into two pieces so I can show you the two different ways to cut your scones. Not precise. Baking may be like chemistry, but when you're separating the dough at the end, it doesn't have to be science. See, I'm making a nice round right here. And this one sits together. I will make into my smaller round biscuit scones with the biscuit cutter. Use my rolling pin, roll it out here. Now, I do like substantial scones. Watch the tea video when it comes out and you'll learn more about scones and the order that you eat your tea in, along with a few other etiquette tidbits. I didn't flour my rolling pin enough, and we're sticking to it. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Small round scones, almost ready to be baked. And over here, my big round, I'm going to find my knife. This is how you make the triangles. You're just cutting up. You might want to wait until it's on the baking sheet before you do this. I will bake my scones for 15 to 20 minutes, checking after the 15-minute mark. The recipe calls for 15 minutes, but I find, even with my new stove, that it needs the full 20 minutes. If you are baking them with any extra liquids, liquidy fruit or any berries or anything like that, you definitely want to give them the extra time. And if you're making your triangular scones, you definitely want the extra time as well. They don't have as much air going around them in the oven for baking. Now, these small rounds, along with the big one, aren't ready yet because I'm going to put some milk on top of them just to help brown them up a little bit. And I'm also going to put some coarse sugar on them. Like this. You can use cream, you can use sour cream, you can use butter, water if you need to. This just helps to create a little bit more of a browning on top. And sugar adds extra little sweet and adds a little extra texture to the top of your scones. You do not need to use coarse sugar. I just happen to have some. You could use colored sugar if you want, sprinkles, anything like that. So let's put this on the big one. I will transfer it to a baking sheet shortly. See? Doesn't have to be perfect. Put it in there. Put it anywhere. And now we will put our scones in the oven to bake here they are, perfectly baked, nice and warm, and ready for us to eat. So put them there to cool, and get them ready to serve with our cup of tea. And my tea. We'll see you there. Make sure you come and join us for our tea. Thank you.